Welcome to a Community Partners interview where we explore the organizations, opportunities, and resources that look to make change in our daily lives. I'm your host, Davy, and you're listening to Voices for Ability Radio, all abilities, all the time. Today, I'm joined by Alicia Smith, the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada. Dyslexia Canada is a national charity dedicated to ensuring that every child in Canada with dyslexia receives a fair and equitable education. Dyslexia Canada was formed in 2016 as a way to ensure that there was a national voice and forum to advocate for all Canadian children with dyslexia. By partnering with professional organizations, experts, and advocates, Dyslexia Canada strives to drive systemic change by engaging and educating the public and establishing legislation. Thanks for joining us today, Alicia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. Now, to begin, why don't you tell us and our listeners out there a little bit more about yourself and perhaps what inspired you to work with Dyslexia Canada and with individuals with disabilities as a whole?
Sure. Well, the first thing to know is that I'm dyslexic myself. So I was identified with dyslexia in high school. My early educational experience was a bit rocky, I'd say. But I did manage to fly under the radar until high school when, the volume of reading and that sort of thing really started to increase. So having gone through that experience myself, once I had children, I was really on the lookout to make sure that they had the support that they need so they wouldn't face those challenges. And as luck would have it, my firstborn child, my son, is, an incredibly smart, articulate person who also has dyslexia. And the experience that he had in the public education system was even more challenging and more disappointing than the one that I had. So watching him go through that and really recognizing that the education system we are in Ontario is not ready, equipped, and able to identify and support children with dyslexia really turned me into an advocate. So I started off in this space volunteering. I started with advocating to make sure that my child got support. And then recognizing the systemic gaps, started, working with other parents and helping them advocate for their kids, and then looking at the larger systemic issues. And then I joined the International Dyslexia Association and became the president of the Ontario branch for a number of years, where I worked with a whole bunch of other really passionate advocates, a lot of them parents as well. And brought forward through that group a number of systemic challenges in Ontario. And it was through that volunteering that I met up with Dyslexia Canada at first and got to know them. And then when the organization was ready to hire a full-time executive director, they invited me to join them in that capacity.
That is an absolutely amazing and really inspiring progression, I would say. I bet that would feel that would definitely feel very, very fulfilling in many ways, shapes, and forms. Now to that end, you mentioned earlier being dyslexic yourself. Now I cannot say that everybody will be. Will at least know what that's like. But do you think that you can tell us a little bit further about what dyslexia is and how someone can be diagnosed, seeing as the diagnoses could be different for everyone?
Sure. So, I guess I'll start with combating some misconceptions about dyslexia. So very often people think that dyslexia is a visual issue, that it's about, seeing letters move around the page or seeing things backwards, that sort of thing. And that is really not the case. Dyslexia is a language processing difficulty or disability, and it manifests in difficulty in learning to read, like to decode words and spell words. So those are tasks that require coordinating a few different systems. There's a few different tasks that have to happen together in coordination to do that. The first is the ability to hear the sounds in the words. They're to be able to discriminate what those individual sounds are that make up words, and then being able to attach those sounds to letters and being able to do that quickly so that you can, recognize that that is a word. And also being able to do that in reverse so you can spell the word. So people with dyslexia have challenges with some part of that process. For some people, it is really more of that sound-based disorders. So it's phonological discrimination, the ability to hear the individual sounds. For some, it's about the ability to very quickly recognize symbols. So it can express in different ways, but the causes can be for different reasons. But what it really is a big difficulty in learning to read quickly and accurately, and being able to spell words accurately, and write quickly enough to get your thoughts down on paper. So it can be very, very frustrating. That's how it really expresses, in that, very often individuals with dyslexia have strong language abilities, but when it comes to accessing information through print, it takes us a lot longer to do that, and that can be very frustrating. And the same is true with the writing piece. In terms of how people get diagnosed with dyslexia, that was the second part of your question. Often that happens after, long after kids have been struggling for an extended period of time. And then they end up getting referred to a psychologist for an assessment. So in my case, I didn't have any sort of assessment done until I was in high school. For my son, they waited until we were told that they couldn't do any sort of assessment until after he was in grade 3. So you go through this extended period of time of struggling with tasks that you look around and you see that everybody else can do this without any real problem. And so it can be incredibly frustrating and have a really negative impact on your self-esteem and confidence.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, in terms of mentioning what was it, access to information, be it print or otherwise. I was actually doing some research. We were actually doing some research ahead of time in preparation for this interview with you on your website and whatnot. And we noticed that, and you could, and feel free to correct us if any of the information sounds wrong. But we noticed that you also had some webinars, on your website as well. Something, stuff about something called OnLit. And the Dyslexia Compass. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about all of those?
Yes, absolutely. So Dyslexia Canada works on doing public education and also education for teachers, a lot of that. So through our Dyslexia Canada website, we offer webinars on a regular basis for parents so they can really understand the warning signs of dyslexia, because we know that the sooner that we identify kids and get supports put in place, the less of that frustration they're going to experience, the more likely it is that they're going to be able to become very good, proficient readers, and we can preserve their mental health and set them off on a good pace. So we do a lot of parental education through those webinars. Also, those webinars, we help parents understand how to navigate the education system if they do have a child that is struggling and not getting the support that they need. On the teacher side of things, when Dyslexia Canada landed on our mission, you mentioned it in the opening, and I really appreciate that. Our mission is to ensure that every child with dyslexia receives a fair and equitable education. And when we landed on that mission, we did quite a bit of research, and we consulted with experts in Canada and internationally to really identify the policies and practices that need to be in place in the education system to make that happen, right? And a lot of that comes back to teacher training. So there's sort of 3 big practices that we want to see in place in the education system. Those are ensuring that classroom reading instruction for all kids is based on the most effective practices that have been identified through scientific study. I was shocked as a parent to discover that that was not what was happening in schools when my son started kindergarten by far. There was some very, very big gaps between evidence and practice in the curriculum in Ontario at the time. The next piece is universal screening. So that is a way of identifying kids who are at risk for dyslexia and other causes of reading difficulties starting in kindergarten, so that we can do the third thing, which is early intervention. So making sure that those kids that are at risk for dyslexia are receiving intervention and support as quickly as possible, ideally starting in kindergarten, so that we can, prevent or reduce the amount of challenges that they're going to have. But all 3 of those things rely on teachers who have been trained and provided with all of the information that they need so that they can teach every child, including kids with dyslexia, how to read. So that's another major focus of Dyslexia Canada, and that's what we do through the OnLit project. So that is a separate website that is funded by the Ministry of Education in Ontario. And through that platform, we are offering teacher training and support for educators across Canada so that they can connect with the most recent scientifically backed information about how reading develops and the different types of challenges that children might experience and how they can respond to those as an educator.
And that's absolutely great. And that's absolutely great. Fantastic, even. To that end, upon further research, we also looked at something called. We also came upon something called Dyslexia Compass. Do you think you could tell us what that's about too?
Yes. Sorry, I think you mentioned that, and I missed that in my first answer.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. So Dyslexia Compass is one of the biggest programs that we run. And it is direct advocacy support for families. So the education system, as I sort of mentioned there when my son started school, is not, by and large, equipped and ready to put those scientifically evidence-based practices into play yet, right? We are typically not identifying kids when they're in kindergarten. We are typically not providing them with effective early intervention. And we are typically sort of pushing them through the education system until they get to the point where they're in grade 3 or they're grade 4. And it's a bit of a crisis often for families. The child is years behind in reading. It's taken a big impact on their mental health, their self-esteem. Often for children, they end up expressing that through negative antisocial behaviors, acting out in the classroom, or withdrawal and disengagement from learning in general. So it's a really stressful and really, really challenging experience for the entire family, for the student for sure, but also for their family. So we have the Dyslexia Compass program is designed to support families that are in that situation. It's entirely free. They reach out to us. We have staff and volunteers who are trained to help them identify the appropriate next steps for their child. So we spend a lot of time listening, talking to families via email or on the phone, and helping them come up with a plan and then helping them execute that plan. Because even once you have identified that the child has dyslexia, getting the support put in place in the public education system is a real challenge. And a lot of places, they're simply not equipped to do it. So our team assists with that. We will go with parents to IEP meetings. We will sit in there and advocate alongside them or for them if they request us to do that, to try and get those supports put in place for the child.
Of course, and of course, and that absolutely would be beneficial. Now, to wrap up the stuff. To wrap up a little bit about the stuff in terms of our pre-interview research. Now, I could be wrong. And I do stand corrected if I am. I noticed that there was something called Market Read It. Now, do you think that you could tell us a little bit about that as well?
Sure. So that is our national advocacy awareness program. So it's very interesting. Dyslexia is the most common cause of reading difficulties, but it is not something that people really talk about a lot. So we know that it impacts somewhere between 10 and 20% of the population. But, it's not something that is discussed in the education system. It's not something that parents are usually told about when kids are born. Here's what you need to be looking out for. So we launched a national awareness campaign that runs every October. So October is Learning Disabilities Awareness Month, and we celebrate dyslexia awareness during that same month. And our Market Red campaign is designed to do just that. So we've chosen the color red, and the title of that campaign is sort of a play on words. Red, like the color red, like READ, like I read it. And red was the color that is chosen because it is the color that so many of us dyslexic people have seen so much of on, spelling tests and assignments and things like that you hand in throughout your school career. They're always coming back filled with red ink, right? So it was a dyslexia advocate in Australia that had the idea of starting an international campaign to reclaim the color red and use that as the color of dyslexia awareness. So throughout October, we do things like we light up buildings across Canada. We've had the CN Tower in Niagara Falls and the Calgary Tower lit up in the color red for a day. We also really put out an extra social media push during the month to really, get the message out there and try to get into mainstream media as well. And we have dyslexia awareness flags. We have, individual families that will do things like get their town to do an official proclamation of Dyslexia Awareness Month. So it is really intended to be just a big awareness campaign to get people having these discussions, to start breaking down stereotypes, and to start making individuals with dyslexia feel more comfortable as well about sharing their stories.
That is absolutely amazing to know that something like that is even happening. Though I must admit, entire towns doing their own sort of a proclamation. Really?
Yes, yeah, we've had a number of them. If anybody's listening and wants to get a proclamation for their town, please reach out to us. You can email us at info@dyslexiacanada.org. We have a template letter that you can download from the website that sort of tells you how to go about doing that. But we've had some pretty major cities do that. City of Toronto has done that. Up near where I live, Springwater Township in Ontario does that every year, and the mayor goes out and actually raises a dyslexia awareness flag. So that's really great. I think we've had Halifax do it. There's a few different places. We've had a couple provincial proclamations as well. New Brunswick has given us an official proclamation a couple of times. So it's really the sort of thing, if anybody wants to get involved with that, it's a lot of fun. And there's lots of different ways that you can get involved. So definitely encourage anyone listening to reach out.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. And you heard Alicia, everyone. If you're interested, then reach out. But that being said, other than town proclamations and all the other campaigns that you and Dyslexia Canada run, are there any other events coming up that this year anyway that Dyslexia Canada will be taking part in?
Yes, so we take part in a number of different events. Some of them are things that we host that are smaller scale, like parent information nights, that sort of thing, where we will often, go rent a space in a public library and then, get some cookies and coffee and invite the public to come and learn about dyslexia. So we do that sort of thing on an ongoing basis. You can find out about new events if you join our mailing list. We always send out lots of notice for those. We also attend other public events. We have a sort of information booth that we put up at different sorts of public events. Last year, we went to Agribition in Regina for a week and had a little booth there, and we're handing out information. That was lots of fun. We also attend lots of educational conferences. And I think the next one that's upcoming is there's a dyslexia conference, parent conference in Toronto that's being hosted by the International Dyslexia Association Ontario branch. That is at the end of April. And they are having the Friday of that conference is for parents, and then the Saturday, Sunday is more focused for educators. But I'll be presenting at that conference as well, a session on advocating for your child within the public education system. So it's right up my alley. But yes, we participate in lots of events throughout the year, and all of that information, we have a monthly newsletter. People can find out about it, or you can follow us on social media and find out where you can connect with us.
And more on that to recap later. But before we get there, without naming any names or getting too specific, are there any sort of success stories that you could share with us today? Perhaps say about someone who came to Dyslexia Canada for help and then where they wound up now?
Yes. Yeah, there are lots of great success stories. It's really hard to pick one person. But I think what I might pick is more of a larger systemic success story, in that when Dyslexia Canada started back in 2016, and as I said, did that research to identify what are the systemic changes that need to happen so that we can make sure that kids are getting the support that they need, and landed on those three things: better classroom reading instruction, early screening, and better earlier intervention. They worked with a whole bunch of parents. It was back when I was volunteering with the International Dyslexia Association. I wasn't with Dyslexia Canada at the time. But a group of people got together and approached the Ontario Human Rights Commission and made the case that having these things in place was actually necessary, like ensuring that children got those three things was necessary as a part of every child's right to an education. So we made the case that because Ontario wasn't doing those three things, because kids with dyslexia were not being identified and were being pushed along through the education system, often without ever receiving proper intervention, that was violating their human rights. And we made the argument that Ontario needed to make these changes. And the commission responded by launching a full public inquiry in 2019, in which they audited a representative sample of Ontario school boards. They audited all of the university faculties of education because we made the case that teachers should know what dyslexia is and how to identify it and support it, but that they didn't. So after spending 2.5 years, again, auditing the school boards, auditing the faculties of education, the Human Rights Commission concluded that Ontario was systematically failing students with dyslexia and many others, and made sweeping recommendations for systemic change, including changing the entire approach to teaching reading in Ontario and bringing in universal early screening. And so both of those things have now been in place. Screening just started this year. But through that process, starting in 2019, bringing that awareness to schools and school boards that, there is a better way to do business. There's other things you can do that would support children. A number of school boards were really excited about this and then were really early adopters and put those practices in place themselves before the Human Rights Commission and the province told them that they needed to. And so to me, those are the biggest success stories. There's one school that I know of where one of the teachers that helps us out with the OnLit project is teaching. And she brought in those practices in her kindergarten class 3 years ago. And so, there's a 2-year kindergarten program in Ontario. So that crop of kids that were the first ones to get that approach starting in kindergarten are in grade 2 this year. And her school, just to give you a bit of a background, has had a reading intervention program for grade 2 students that's been in place at their school for a very long time. And she said previously, they were able to run 2 groups and take 16 grade 2 students to give reading intervention to. But there were always way more students than 16 who needed that intervention. So they would have to have these really horrendous conversations about essentially which kids are we going to teach to read and which ones are we not going to teach to read. But this was the first year that the kids in grade 2, at the beginning of grade 2, had all received that instruction. She'd screened them all. She'd provided them with that early intervention. And for the first time ever, they didn't have enough kids that were struggling with reading to even fill up one group. So to me, that is the biggest success story, is that we are now creating a system in which kids can have their needs met and they don't need to sit there and struggle.
And that I think we can both agree is an absolutely amazing and great success. On that note, you could argue that the systemic failing could be a problem that people with disabilities encounter. However, in your opinion, other than maybe that systemic failing, what is one thing you see happening repeatedly to individuals with disabilities that shouldn't be, and how do we collectively go about stopping it?
I think the biggest thing that I see happening is low expectations, right? There's this thought that comes up, oh, this person has a disability, so we just need to lower our expectations and lower what we imagine that they can achieve. And to me, that cuts right across all disabilities, right? That is exactly what I experienced with my son. The conversation around his potential and his ability changed the minute that he got a learning disability diagnosis. The narrative went from, oh, he is so smart, he will catch up in time, he will be fine, to, oh, he has a learning disability. You need to adjust your expectations. And I was actually told, this is a direct quote, you need to teach him to live with his limitations. And I was like, no, absolutely not, right? So to me, that is the biggest piece, is fighting against that narrative that we are limited in what we can achieve and accomplish.
Absolutely, and that makes total sense. I can't tell you how many times myself I've been told to learn to live with something. And I've had other people, be it friends or even colleagues and coworkers, even tell me instances where they've been told to live with something themselves. So yeah, absolutely, I definitely agree with you there. Now, that being said, our listeners, I'm sure, are interested in a lot. I'm sure would definitely be interested after hearing a lot of what we had been talking about today. Now, that being said, for any of our listeners who are interested, say in wanting to become a volunteer, perhaps, what's the process of what's the process for volunteering look like?
Sure. So you can visit the Dyslexia Canada website, and we do have a page on there about volunteering. So we have different areas that we have volunteers for. So it's really about matching the person and their interests and their time availability to the sort of roles that we have. We have some volunteer commitments that are quite involved, like the Dyslexia Compass volunteers, for example. Like that requires quite a bit of training, and we need people there that have the ability to help out on an ongoing basis. And then we do also have opportunities where we are looking for people who are just available to, roll up their sleeves and help out with an event or help out with, packaging up materials. We do a lot of shipping of information and books and things like that across the country. So you can get that information on our website. We have a volunteer form where you can just fill out the form and let us know about your interests and, as I said, your time availability and what you're looking to do. And then we have an absolutely wonderful volunteer coordinator who will reach out and follow up with a phone call or a Zoom conversation to just have a chat more about the opportunities that we have and our needs and the interest of the individual. And we try our best to pair people up in roles that will make them happy.
Fair enough. And apart from that section on your website about volunteering, I noticed that there is something about an online store as well.
Yes, we do have. It's mostly merch, so we have on there. You can order a Dyslexia Canada hats and T-shirts and things like that. That's really popular during October. So if you're looking for ways to participate in the Market Red campaign in October, we have a variety of T-shirts and hats and things like that you can wear. To sort of show your support for that initiative. We also have on the website an area where you can order print materials. Those are all free, actually. It's not an online store, but it's we have brochures. We have little checklists for parents that have the sort of warning signs of dyslexia at different ages. And we encourage people to visit that part of the website. And if they want to help the organization, you can just order for free a bunch of print materials and then take them to your local library, local school, community center, and display them there. It's just a way to help people connect with information about dyslexia.
And on the note of information, I know you've already mentioned the website info at dyslexiacanada.org and several other points online where people can access this information. However, if our listeners are looking for that information, again, do you think that you could just let us know how they could find you? Let us know how they could reach you?
Sure. So we are on the website, which is dyslexiacanada.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We are no longer on Twitter. So you can connect with us through those platforms as well. We have a YouTube channel that is filled with recordings of our previous webinars. So if you're looking for information, you can always visit the YouTube channel and watch recordings of those videos. Or you can get more information about reading and reading development through the onlit.org website that we run. And that website also has associated social media channels.
That's absolutely amazing. And Alicia, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And thank you. Well, fantastic. With that, we've reached the end of yet another amazing interview segment. You were listening to Community Partners presented by Voices for Ability Radio. All abilities, all the time. I'm your host, Davy. Be safe, be kind, and I'll see you all next time.